All right, guys, so we are getting really close to the end of the book. This next chapter, called The Eagle Crippled, is about Santa Anna's life following the major wars in Texas. And it's kind of a long one, so I'm going to actually break it up into three parts. So I'll go ahead and get started. It's called The Eagle Crippled. Santa Anna's later career was even more dramatic. He took advantage of Houston's refusal to use the firing squad to good purpose, gaining friends in Washington and political advantage in Mexico. Ensconced back on his estates after returning from Washington, his deportment continued to be a tantalizing mix of personal courage, ridiculous bravado, and mercurial rises to the heights followed by plunges into despair from which few could have recovered. Most sensational was the affair after he lost his leg. In a village not far from Mexico City, a French pastry cook who had emigrated to Mexico operated a small but popular patisserie under the proud sign Dulces a la Francesca. One night, a gang of Mexican officers celebrating their promotion to captain wrecked this pastry shop, causing 800 pesos worth of damage for which the owner presented a bill. The Mexican government refused to pay even that small amount, and incredible as it seemed, a war with France resulted. When a French fleet bombarded Veracruz, a city cherished by Santa Anna because of the many good things that had happened to him there, he leaped upon his white horse and galloped down the hill from Jalapa to defend it. This time he performed heroically, dashing here and there to give his troops courage. He had the great good luck to be hit by an 8-pound cannonball fired by a French ship in the harbor. It damaged his left leg so seriously that it had to be amputated. This did not deter the ambitious warrior. Promptly, he had woodcarvers make him 4 wooden legs, which he carried with him in a leather case, one for dress, one for everyday wear in the country, one for battle, and the 4th for evening wear. Each different, each made of different materials. The one for evening wear was made very light and made of cork. How could the loss of a leg prove to be an act of unusual good fortune? Not only was he reinstated as president, but, as one of his aides later explained, "You'll never hear our dictator speak 4 sentences in a public oration, and he makes them constantly without hearing an account of how he lost his leg in the service of his nation. He has 15 clever ways of casually referring to it. Heroic. I galloped into the very mouth of the French cannon and lost my leg in doing so. Self-pity, with tears. In a moment of great danger, I surrendered my leg to the glory of my country. Challenging. Do you think a man who has lost his leg defending in his country is afraid of a threat like that? His missing leg ensures him the role of dictator for life, and all because of that miserable pastry shop. No man achieves greatness if he is not clever enough to use a pastry shop to his advantage, or a missing leg." His endless apostrophes to his missing leg engendered in time a monomania regarding it, and one summer's day he invited to Manga de Clavo, his ranch at Jalapa, one of the trusted assistants into whose hands he placed government matters during the frequent periods when he resigned from the presidency. When the visitor arrived, he was astonished at the appearance of Santa Anna, extremely thin, his face poetically gaunt, his walk as he limped forward to greet his lieutenant resembling that of a cripple. "I lost a leg, you know, defending our nation at Veracruz." On this day, he was wearing his country landowner leg, and before his assistant could reply, he reached out, clasped him by the shoulder, and said with unfeigned enthusiasm, "In honor of the great days when we defended this nation against the French, let us see the cocks fight." And he led the way, springing along with no perceptible difficulty to the small circular building in which he conducted his famous cockfights. While his birds were fighting, Santa Anna revealed the astonishing duty to which the visitor had been summoned. "Trusted companion, I seek a guard of honor for a deed of honor. In response to demands from the people of Mexico and also its religious leaders, I have consented with some reluctance, for I am essentially a modest man, to have my left leg disinterred, borne to the Capitol in solemn procession, and buried in a pantheon reserved for heroes." "Your leg?" the visitor asked. "Why not?" Santa Anna snapped. "It gave itself in service to our nation. What leg has ever meant so much to any nation? What does it not deserve the treatment we give other heroes?" "It certainly does," the man said hurriedly, and he was present when the leg was dug up, placed upon an ornate catafalque, and started on its journey to the Capitol. The assistant and one of Santa Anna's young military aides, designated by the dictator my equerry. Santa Anna had read that English kings were served by equerries, were given specific orders. "Leave for Mexico City right now. Ride fast and alert the town that the leg is coming, and see to it that multitudes line the avenues when it rides into town." Goaded by the two ambitious messengers, thousands did turn out, and at the splendid cathedral in the center of town, more than 50 priests of various ranks, including a passel of bishops, waited to place the leg in a position of honor below the altar. Here, legions of the faithful could come and kneel and say brief prayers. 2 days later, the 28th of September, 1842, with Santa Anna himself in attendance, entire regiments of cavalry in resplendent uniforms, young cadets from the military academy at Chapultepec, a solemn procession of priests and religious dignitaries, the entire civilian cabinet, and the most of the diplomatic corps marched to the beat of 7 military bands, leaving the center of the city and progressing to the historic cemetery of Santa Paula, where a cenotaph had been erected to the dictator's leg. Prayers were said, chants were sung, rifles were fired. Santa Anna wept, the multitudes cheered, and soldiers stood at reverential attention while flags were draped over the coffin and the leg lowered into its new and more stately grave. Lamentably, the same equerry was on duty in the capital 2 years later when a vast revulsion against the wild pomposity of Santa Anna surfaced, and the man watched in horror as a mob tore down a gilded statue of the dictator in the center of the city, rampaged through the streets, and cheered when a crazy-eyed leader shouted, "Let's get that leg!" From a safe distance, the young military man followed the frenzied rabble as it broke down the gates of Santa Paula Cemetery, destroyed the cenotaph honoring the leg, dug up the bones, and dragged them ignominiously through the very streets where they had previously been paraded with such majesty. He was aghast when the bones were separated, some going to one part of the city, some to another, with all of them ending in rubbish piles. Through back streets, he made his way to the palace from which the dictator had ruled with such unchallenged authority, and there he found him packing his wooden legs in their case as he prepared for flight. When the equerry informed him of events at the cemetery, the great man sat heavily upon a truck packed with silver objects and sniffled. "My leg, the symbol of my honor, proof of the love I hold for Mexico. You mean they dragged it through the streets?" With that, he hobbled off to one more lifelong exile, and as he disappeared into the dusk, the young man mumbled, "Mexico can never know real glory without him." As could have been predicted, once more Santa Anna's exile was of brief duration, but the circumstances of his return were almost incomprehensible. When conditions in Mexico deteriorated to the point of war with the United States, Mexico summoned him back and not only reinstated him as president, but also conferred on him the powers of a dictator. That Mexico should invite him back was understandable, for he was a charismatic figure and to some a public hero. But that President Polk of the United States should believe reports spread by Santa Anna himself that if the United States helps me to return, I will be a bridge of peace between two nations, was amazing, since Polk must have been aware of Santa Anna's mercurial switches in loyalty. When Santa Anna chartered a British steamer, however, Polk ordered U.S. naval gunboats to escort the wily Mexican back to his homeland from his exile in Havana. It was another splendid triumph, but was to have only a short life. Determined to regain the Tejas lands lost at the Battle of San Jacinto and to punish the arrogance of the United States, this one-legged adventurer launched a huge army, as ill-equipped as ever because its officers still stole the funds intended for guns, horses, and uniforms, into the battles taking place in what is now known as the War with Mexico of 1846. At one point, it looked as if he might defeat the Americans and win back Texas, but in time, superior American forces, one army pressing down from the north, a second invading through Veracruz and onto the Central Plateau where Mexico City itself was invaded, led to a crushing American victory and a dictated peace in which Mexico, because of the impetuous behavior of Santa Anna, surrendered huge areas of Mexican territory. Thus, he became the most expensive president Mexico ever had in terms of lands lost to the nation. Exiled once more, this time for 5 years in Jamaica, Santa Anna was yet again to be recalled to the presidency by a nation slow to learn its lesson. Accepting the title, His Most Serene Highness, in 1853, he was ousted within 2 years by the more liberal political factions and exiled again for almost 10 years. In all he did, despite his sometimes good intentions, the results he achieved were invariably disastrous to his nation. Although he accomplished no further irreversible damage to his country during these last 28 years of his life after the war with the United States, 24 of them spent in exile, Santa Anna continued his attempts to insert himself into Mexican politics. Isolated at St. Thomas and the Danish Virgins, he was probably not even aware that his old adversary Sam Houston had died. The Mexican general had fared so poorly against the Texans that he preferred to ignore them. But he could never ignore his craving for the limelight, and he was yet to perform several more dazzling switches in his loyalties.